Thank you all for joining us today. Our topic today, difficult conversations in legal aid, caring for clients and caring for self. I am really happy to be discussing this particular topic because it is a way for attorneys working in various fields to take care of themselves, right? This particular need for health and competency to coexist is really important. So as you all know, this is why we're doing this today. You do have rules of professional conduct, and we ask that attorneys that are working with clients are committed to taking care of themselves as they are discharging their duties. And so hopefully today we can discuss some topics that will assist you in your practice. Next slide. So our agenda today is limited to 4 key areas. One is how to prepare to work with clients. So a lot goes into preparation, but that sets you up to take care of yourself in the long run, right? So we'll focus on that topic. I'm going to introduce some tools for having difficult conversations, while each one can be a training on their own, and I hope to be able to share some information on each one of these. It is definitely, I know, a larger conversation to be had. So, but I hope to provide you with some tools and some resources so that you can go ahead and refer to them, right, as you're undertaking new ways to approach your work. And then a topic that's really important to me lately is professional sustainability. I see so many doing this great work, but it's really difficult for them to stay in a career when there are certain demands without those tools, right? So one of the ways to stay engaged in the work is to start honing some of these other skills to make the job more manageable and truly more compassionate. And then the last is personal growth and self-care. So people like to use the word self-care. It can mean a lot of things, right? And what's most important is that you get to define what self-care looks like. The other component is personal growth. So many do not realize that the common effects of burnout usually occur when you don't have the sense of growth within your work environment. But as we know, many of us take home our work with us, and trying to find ways to sustain ourselves beyond our career, right? So that a career is part of what you do. So many of us ask others when we meet, what do you do for a living, right? And I'd like to challenge us to say, hi, what motivates you? What do you love? What do you do for love, right? Because what we do for love and what we do for money might not be the same thing. And for those of us where it is the same thing, we're very fortunate, but it's important to linger some time around this personal growth and self-care area. So moving along onto our next slide. I just wanted to leave this quote here for a second. So many of you by now have heard of Brené Brown, and this particular quote really spoke to me, because as I am doing this work and I've engaged with different legal aids, this is a topic, right, that comes up a lot. It's the feeling that we are trapped. If we could go back to the quote. We feel sometimes trapped when we have difficult conversations with clients. So I wanted us to just linger here for a second. Choosing our own comfort over hard conversations is the epitome of privilege, and it corrodes trust and moves us away from meaningful and lasting change. And in thinking about this, right, and thinking about the work that we do, so many feel like they need to distance themselves from the hard conversation, that they are overwhelmed, right, by the stories that they hear and the challenges that some of their clients face. And this idea that we can go home in the evening, and I know many of us take our work home, right, and those thoughts and those stories go home with us. but we don't live in it necessarily, right? We can walk away from it. And so if we really hope to have an impact of lasting change, we must be whole and they must be closer, right, to that state of safety, of having their basic human needs met. So when we do this work, if we try to center the fact that we're not trying to necessarily separate ourselves or compartmentalize, right, but develop skills so that we can compassionately engage with our clients and remain present as we're doing the work, and then learn a little bit more about ourselves. And that's going to require some time to really get to know what works for you, right? And it's going to take a commitment to being reflective and figuring out what supports need to be in place. So with this, I'd like to move on to the first topic in our agenda. So how do we prepare to work with clients? Next slide, please. So as we're preparing to do this work, we have to consider our role, right? And the reason I'm putting role up is role will help center you as to how you're going to engage with your client, right? So part of it is determining what is my responsibility in this professional relationship. How do I communicate what my role is going to be in a way that the client understands? And where does my responsibility begin and end? And in describing our role, we then get to invite our client into the conversation and collaborate, right? And you'll notice that's a bullet point down below. But let's go on to a few other things that determine how we prepare to work with our clients. We also have to consider the context. So it may be a Tuesday for us. We're going to court, right? I don't know, or it could be a mediation hearing. It could be a lot of different things on a Tuesday. We are familiar with the players. We are familiar with where they sit. We are familiar with where we can offer support and where we can't. And so it's really important for us to check in with our client to see, are they familiar with this process, with this setting? Do they have any questions, right? And oftentimes it can be so overwhelming that our client is actually shut down in a way, right? They could be flooded with feelings that then release chemicals, neurochemicals, and then we have to then try to bring them back and center them and ground them, right? And it's difficult to do that and lawyer at the same time, right? You're in court and you have a role to fill there. Say you're in office. Are you the only person that's part of that team? Or are there going to be other members in the office that are responsible for different things, right? So that's a combination of your role in the context. Are you meeting them out in the community with a community partner? Maybe a resource that we've referred them to. What level of support and understanding do they have about the various parts of the work that you're doing, right? So sometimes you'll have a client calling you for support when really that's not your role. So if you've clearly defined your role, you might have to describe it to your client and give them examples. And again, it's not a bad thing. It's just a conversation and it's learning, right? But it's not to shy away from that conversation. And both of these things, understanding the context and your role, will help with things such as boundaries and limits and exercising kind of what you're discharged to do professionally, right? It then creates your pillars that hold up, and creates the foundation, if you will. Then preparation. What do you know about your client? What do you know about the case, right? And when I say preparation, that also means knowing your client within the context of their life. This is the holistic component, right? So when you conduct an intake, is it just looking holistically at different legal matters that might be impacting the case? Or Are you looking at the client holistically? Are they having difficulty making meetings because they have challenges or barriers? In addressing those, you might be able to prepare for more constructive outcomes, right? Like they're present for the meetings, they're prepared for the meetings. It then invites them to engage in the process, right? Okay. Transparency. So transparency is a huge part of trauma-informed work. And it's letting people know what to expect, right? Say your office hours are Monday through Friday. You don't have emergency hotlines. You're not equipped with mental health professionals on site, or that's not their role, right? So you have a lot of things to kind of just reveal to the client so they know exactly what to expect, right? And then transparency and outcomes, right? You can prepare all you want for a case. And ultimately, who is adjudicating is the one that ultimately, may have some control over that, right? Or it could be a jury, or it could be a lot of different things, right? But people that are outside your control, right? So it's really important to consider all the factors. And I know many of you are already doing this, right? To try to ground your clients, but it builds trust, right? Between you and your client when everything is transparent. And so it's really important to not be in the power position and not include the client in those decisions or in that information that you might be privy to, right? Or that you might just have a better understanding of, right? Because we each contribute to the progress, right, of a case. Cultural humility. This is another huge piece of trauma-informed services. So it's understanding that there is no such thing as cultural competence, right? It's cultural responsiveness, and it's based on your interaction with the client and what they reveal about the context of their life, or how they function, or how they see the world, or how they're experiencing something, right? Because their particular expression, understanding, and identity could be distinctly different than somebody else who carries a similar label, right? But they're not the same people. So you can have cultural awareness, cultural responsiveness, but to truly have competence, it would require constantly getting to know this one person, right? And checking in with them, because things change. That's the other thing about competence, right? You don't just take it once and you're done. As many of you know, many of us professionally have to do our MCLEs or CEUs and check in periodically. Why? Because information changes, right? And somebody's experience can vary at different times of their life. So it's important for us to approach with cultural humility, and also acknowledging our own privilege in a situation, right? How do we set up a power dynamic in the conversation? Do we allow space for the client to reveal what they are expert on in their life, how they've kept themselves safe, how they've made ends meet? Let them reveal their strengths, and also share with you their challenges and where they may need to develop some skills or have additional resources, right? And this invites then collaboration, right? It's very progressive. It's not linear. You have to start attuning yourself so that you can be ready, right? That preparedness piece for when the opportunities present themselves in conversations. You're going to learn so many layers. There's so many layers to each client that we serve, right? And so many that have intersectional experiences, right? They may be a Latina, but also have a mental health challenge, right? Either being diagnosed or not being diagnosed and need help with that. Or might be socioeconomically challenged at that particular time as a result of a divorce, right? Leaving an abusive partner, perhaps. So, it requires lots of awareness in order to look for those opportunities of collaboration. But if it is our default to want to collaborate and we're not wearing our capes, right? We're not the rescuers, we're the collaborators, and we bring in our strengths and our areas of expertise and our knowledge and our training and try to meet them at the intersection of their life, what has brought them into your office, right? And then also in communicating limitations, what are the limitations? So with a lot of this work, it's important to allow for opportunities of voice and choice. If you've been in one of my trainings before, you will know this is something I like to reiterate more than once, right? So limitations may occur and we can't force them. So then we might be at a crossroads and trying to determine how to do this work or if the work should go forward, right? And there might be limitations based on your professional rules, right, that you have to follow. Or there could be limitations on where the client's at in their process, right, of receiving help or in their life. And the two may not meet at that particular time, right? Some clients probably come in for a consult at times and are not ready to move forward with the case. Or you might assign them things to do, but they weren't really bought into that goal. So they didn't actually bring in what they needed, right? So it's going to be really important that, that we try to discover what are the challenges. And hopefully we'll discuss some tools today that you could use in any of these contexts, right, to assist. Next slide, please. So where do we begin? So in that preparation piece, definitely the client-centered approach. You always hear, meet the client where they're at. And it would be really great to ask what sort of information is necessary to get the case started, right? What additional information helps frame the context of the conversation? Why now? Why are they coming in now? What is the precipitating factor? What changed in the relationship? What changed in their circumstance? How long have things been going on like this, right? These are clinical questions that we often ask, but I've also seen really great legal interviews where this is part of the get to know you phase, right? As you're getting to know your client. As mentioned before, power dynamics. How do we frame our questions, right? So we try to stay away with, you know, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Why did that happen? Sometimes we'll ask, what happened? How did you experience it? Right? Just a little change in the question can shift the conversation. What is the language that we use? Right? Power dynamics are not just when you're with the client, but think of all the times, and I'll bring this up numerous times. We always have these trainings sometimes that pop up that said working with difficult clients, working with challenging clients, working with non-compliant clients. Maybe we're just not asking the right questions, right? And maybe they're just not there. What does trauma look like? Are they challenged? Are they challenging? Or is that their trauma response? Is that how they've learned to have their needs met? Right? And is there a power dynamic even in our speech, right? And we hear lots of people, you know, say we need to destigmatize mental health, right? Mental health needs, mental health issues. The truth is, some of us are maybe born with mental health diagnoses or needs that come up throughout our course, right? And it's organic and it's just something that we happen to be experiencing, right? We're the ones that happen to have it. It runs in families sometimes, right? Or we had a life event that triggered something, or we had an injury that triggered something, right? So if we can like reframe it from a human perspective, we all have experiences in life. And some are one time, some are chronic, some are out of our control, right? And I would argue almost all of it is out of our control. right? That particular piece of it. The response and the coping and the resources and all of those other things that help support somebody that, say, has diabetes, we can look at mental health the same way, right? There's a portion of it that are our choices. Can we take medication? Can we have therapy? Can we have whatever? But if we're already approaching the conversation as the person providing the service with this kind of power dynamic, like, I'm better because I don't have, right? Or I'm going to be the savior because I don't have. But the truth is, some of us doing this work actually are the same ones that have the same challenges. We just had some protective factors. We developed skills. We had access to services, right? Some of us doing survivor-based work are survivors. So it's really a good place for us to check ourselves, right? So it looks like could we please have the question written in the question section? I believe we have a raised hand. Great. Thank you. I want to try to get to your questions. So, it's important that we also then frame the issue. Like, are we trying to frame the issue for them, or is it important for us to listen to how they're framing the issue? Because then we can start teasing out, what piece can I assist you with, right? They might come in and they might need a referral to speak to somebody to process how they're feeling if they're just coming out of a very abusive relationship where there are power and control, issues. And that is different than our skill set, right? So thank you so much. Then we want to look at strengths and challenges. What does your client come equipped with? Many of our clients are so resourceful. They have found a way to even make it to you for services, right? That's just a percentage of all the people that probably need your services. So they have some resourcefulness and some skills, right? So how do we then engage them with their strengths and help identify what they might need? Now, can you solve everything that's going on with a client? You cannot. So managing your own expectations will definitely come in there, right? And then offering those opportunities for voice and choice. So as you get to know the client, there are going to be things that they just are. This is the deadline. You have to have this form in. We have to do an income and expense declaration, like whatever it may be that you need to do, that needs to be submitted. There's no way around it, right? But maybe there's some choices for how things can get accomplished. Or maybe you have some flexibility on some timelines. Maybe something would make a case stronger, but let's check in with the client to see if that's even something they can take on right now. Is that overall going to help the client? Because if we're just looking at the legal case without the context of their life, then we're missing a big part of it, right? Because what's going to happen to them after the case ends? How do they fully not only participate in their legal matter, but how do they benefit from the legal outcomes, right? How do they positively benefit? Okay, great. Now, stage of change. Where's your client at in this whole process, right? Are they just coming in and like orienting themselves? They're not ready to take any action? Is this a client that's been into your office maybe 6 months ago, is coming back? They have new information, something new has developed in their life, right? So knowing where your client is and where they're willing to engage with the work is a good thing to help you to prepare, right? To at least put on your radar. Because you might come to an impasse. You might say, okay, we've gone as far as we can with this case. And they're like, okay, I think I'm going to, and we've all kind of had that experience where they're like, all right, I don't like how you're handling my case. I'm going to go elsewhere. And that's fine, right? They're figuring that out. They're figuring all that out. And it's their choice. And that's okay. And that's all right. Okay. But where we can meet them is asking, what is the barrier? right? So they keep on showing up late to meetings, or they keep on canceling, finding out, is it a transportation issue? Is it a childcare issue? Is it I don't know. I mean, it could be anything, right? They're not good at tracking time. They're not good at a lot of things. So do they need an appointment reminder? Do they need an email? Do they need a text? How do they communicate best with you, right? There's a lot of different information that you could be taking in to start removing some of those barriers and move forward. Okay. And then mutual goals. Say you do get together and you agree, this is what we're going to do together. This is going to be the work. This is going to be my piece. That's going to be your piece. I need you to have these forms or these docs or this information in, right? Or we're going to have to take a declaration, right? And it's very emotionally triggering. So we're going to have to set up 5 different appointments, right? So that is going to be really important. Okay. So those mutual goals, as you know, should be, specific, measurable, right? But that IE, right? I mean, think about equity, think about inclusion, right? So how many of our clients look like us, come from the same walk of life? Again, it's that cultural humility piece. How's that mutual goal setting work in that context? Are we coming from our perspective, or are we goal setting from their perspective to make it a more successful outcome that makes sense for them, right? And then who gets to measure success, right? We could have a win in court, but is it a success for the client, right? Now, I can share that at our org, we're oftentimes very surprised, but the trauma-informed services work. How do I know this? Because sometimes our clients may not have gotten everything they wanted in court, but they felt heard. There were opportunities built into their experience where they felt heard, they felt validated, they walked away with a better understanding, right? And they were in a better place when the case ended. Maybe that's the win. So checking in with the client about what that measure of success is would be really great. Okay. I'm waiting to see before I'm going to hold for 1 second. Okay. We have a question. So I'm going to pause for a second here. What can we say to people who reach out to us for legal assistance, but appear to not have the mental capacity to meaningfully engage with us? Are there referrals we can provide for the LA area? So there are lots of services, right, that can be provided. One of the really great resources that I've come to discover is an organization called Activating Change. And they have worked with survivors who are deaf, hard of hearing, have different disabilities. And I've also worked with Regional Center to determine what some of those resources are. I've also worked with particular mental health professionals that work with communities of individuals who might be young or might have developmental disabilities and might require additional support. And I welcome you at the end. My email will be available. I'm happy to redirect you to some of those resources, and so that you can then explore. There are others that have some tools at their disposal, and definitely I would say this is something to prepare for in advance, right? So to think about practices and protocols and ways in which you engage clients, and to truly be accessible, right? So when we think about accessibility, it can't be a one-off. We need to start immersing ourselves in this idea that the more accessible our services are, the more we've thought about this prior, we can then engage in this work, and it won't matter who walks in our door. We have some tools to work with them. But I really thank you for bringing up that question. That really is encouraging to me, that we have a lot of practitioners out there that might discover that there's a need in this area. But please do reach out to me, and you can reach out to Kasha, and we'll make sure that you get my email address. Okay. I also want to pause for a second. It looks like, okay. So somebody was asking about that they don't have the capacity to engage. All right. If it's a successful engagement, I think it also comes down to why somebody is coming in for services, right? And what resources. So I think the main thing we can do is prepare to engage with clients and to increase our capacity to serve clients, right? That come from different walks of life that may be needing our services. And it might be very specific to your organization, but I do welcome you to reach out to Activating Change. They would be a good start. They have a compendium of resources, and they do look at this intersectional need. And definitely, it's just about that equity and inclusion piece, right? How do we then make our services accessible for everybody? But yes. Okay, great. Okay, tools for having difficult conversations. This is the section I would like to spend the most time on, because every one of these bullets, these next bullets, are their own training, and I hope to get to them this year. And so we can definitely think about those, but I at least want to highlight them and bring forth some ways that you can approach the work. So the next slide, please. All right. So what are your tools for having difficult conversations? I think we want to approach very strongly from a trauma-informed background, right? And this is kind of your trauma-informed toolkit for having these difficult conversations. I would also like to recommend that you look back to a December 20 training, I believe it was, Kasha. Maybe you can reference that at the end, where I did actually link to a trauma-informed organizational toolkit that will look at questions about accessibility, right? And different trauma-informed issues that arise at an organization, and help you again to prepare for those, right? So one of the big things is accessibility on our list. It can definitely begin with a website, but it shouldn't end with the website, right? This particular training, we engage closed captioning. There's different technology. There are different fonts, even when you give presentations, that are more favorable. And a big shout out to LAC for actually having some suggestions that they use when we're presenting. So it's really great. We actually have an accessibility coordinator at the LA Center for Law and Justice, and she's online with us, Abby. So it's really important that we address this. So that's one of your tools, as evidenced by one of our questions, right? How do we meet our clients where they're at? This needs to be explored, and it is part of an overall trauma-informed organizational assessment. Okay, so definitely start there. You want to create space for feelings. There are going to be feelings. I don't know how all law schools operate, but one of the things I can consistently told is this is the hard part, right? It's not your torts, your constitutional law. It's none of these things, right? I mean, but as you're actually doing the work, being prepared to create that space for feelings, because I know that when a client comes in and they're having those feelings, because it's not just work or a case for them, right? It's their life. Thank you so much, Kasha, for she just linked to the training that where I reference, and I have the resources for the trauma-informed toolkit for your organizational assessments. And it helps highlight things, right? But you need to create space for feelings. Anticipate that there are going to be feelings, and you can try best as you may, but you're going to have deadlines, and it's going to be difficult at times. So how do you hold the space? right? Are you comfortable with silence and checking in with your client? Are you prepared if you know that you need to take, multiple days, right, to meet with the client? Maybe you have social workers on staff like we do, and they can help prep the client for those conversations, right? So there's different ways that you can create space for feelings. Now, is it all going to work out just because you have a social worker, just because you work on coping skills? Just is it going to miraculously work? No. But do you have a better chance of it working and you meeting deadlines and containing that meeting? Yes, you have a better chance than not by preparing, right? Validation and affirmation help acknowledge where a client is at. You can reflect back to them. We're going to talk about motivational interviewing in a second. That is going to have to be its own training, but I did attach to this training in the resources section some more information on motivational interviewing. It takes practice. You can't just read the article. I recommend that at your particular legal practice, you have small work groups and you come up with those difficult circumstances and you talk through them. Why? Because you're good at law. You're the attorneys, right? This may not be your wheelhouse, or you just weren't given this tool. You need to practice with it, right? So that you can recognize the opportunities to utilize either validation, affirmation, de-escalation, and grounding. Like, you need to see where it pops up in your particular practice, right? And when you do, then those are your case studies, your scenarios. And you need to practice, because you're not just going to wake up one day and be great at reflective listening, right? You can, the thing is though, once you master motivational interviewing or you feel confident with it, you can take that with you to coffee with the PTA moms. You can take it with you out on the golf course. You can take it with you out to the dinner party with your spouse or your partner, and you own it. But it's going to take practice, right? So validation and affirmation around feelings is really going to be important. It's a great tool for you, because what it does is it helps for a client to feel heard. And it allows for you the time to listen and really hear what's triggering your client, right? You need to pay attention, because that's where the roadblocks are going to come up. And then the de-escalation and the grounding, right? So sometimes once you know those triggers, your client's going to feel like it's escalating, right? Or they're not getting what they need. And this is a way that they've learned to get their needs met. So you're going to have to start introducing different things for them, right? Or if you see them ramping up emotionally, you can ask them before you even get started. I know some of this conversation is going to be difficult. What do you find is helpful for you? Is it taking a moment, grabbing a drink of water? Is it going to be taking a few deep breaths? Right? Whatever it is, I would check in with your client before you get started. A lot of that is that preparation. The role of silence, right? Some of us feel pressured to move the conversation along, and we just don't allow for that silence. And sometimes just giving it that moment, right? And then you roll into the motivational interviewing, right? With the reflective listening, kind of, this is what I heard you say. And you're checking in for various reasons. So what is motivational interviewing? Does it mean you're motivated to get the answers? Or is it really is a skill, right? It's how do you listen? How do you check in with your client to let them know that you heard them, right? You're going to lower from red, you'll be down into the orange, yellow range. It won't be so heated. They need to feel heard. We all feel a need to be understood and heard, right? It's a human need, but it's amplified in this legal setting, right? So you have active listening, reflective listening. You're checking in to make sure you have information correct, that you're understanding where the barriers or the triggers are for them, right? And you might even ask like some open-ended questions, right? Stay away from yes, no. Build in some time to really ask them questions that are open-ended so that you can discover what those barriers are or how to move things forward. But you're not going to hear it if you just ask a yes, no, thinking that you're going to move the interview along or just get the facts. Right. And if you're just fact finding, well, that's something different. But you need this more deep rooted stuff. You're going to have to spend some time laying the foundation. Right. Because you'll pay for the time either at the front end or the back end. And it's probably more productive at the front end. Okay. And so again, this highlighted section, there is a resource at the end I'll point out to you. Prevention of re-traumatization. Look at your processes at your org. How many times are your staff members asking the same questions? Is there a way for you to use your legal operation systems to pre-populate information? Or is there a way you can prepare before you meet your client to read that info? Right? Because we don't want to just be indiscriminately stepping on people's toes, right? And like bringing up a well of emotion. We don't need to trigger them all over the place. So look at your systems. That's a place we often can be re-traumatizing to our client. Okay. How many cooks do you have in the kitchen at your org? How many staff members are trying to help the client, but there's too much coming at them? They're overwhelmed. So try to streamline processes. All right. That's something for your difficult conversations because they don't want to have those conversations, those very difficult ones with multiple people. So again, that will help the overall process. And it's less likely you're going to have this ultra triggered client. Development of coping skills. It is really great to do a little foundational work in advance. And if you don't have resources in-house, say you don't have social workers in-house, determine if your client is seeing a therapist or does have access to services or a support group, or do you have some helpful handouts? There are helpful resources. There are even some on our website at our org that you can get off of our website, right? And so I would say develop some in-house that you then can offer to clients. You can offer them over orientation to a courtroom. The more you can empower your client, the more those difficult conversations will be easier to have because you've opened a door that is supported, right? They will feel supported. All right, next slide, please. So this is where the difficult conversations come up. And each one of these is probably its own training. And I promise you, I'm going to get to these hopefully in the upcoming year, right? So ethical issues is a place where difficult conversations come up, either with the client or within a team. Okay. And so I'm mentioning this because we do have I like to call it a transdisciplinary team at LACLJ, where we have attorneys and social workers, and our professional guidelines and our mandates are different in some areas, and they coincide very beautifully in others. But it's thinking through and preparing and coming up for how you're going to engage with clients within your professional roles, right? And you need to have that decided because it will come up around things like, say, mandated reporting, right? So you have to decide, what model are we going to use? Are social workers going to be separate? Are they going to be integrated? Are some going to be integrated and others not? Who else do we have as members of our team? Are you working with people in a medical field? Are you working, who is the population you're working with? Are you working with the elderly? Right? So there might be some questions around that. So that's really important to take a look at. Crisis. I've never seen, I can count on it. When a client goes into a crisis, attorneys sometimes can get a little freaked out, especially if they're new attorneys, right? They aren't necessarily prepared for seeing a client in crisis. So what does that look like? And then what resources do you have available? Because you're not mental health providers and you may not have crisis response teams. And we have to always consider with the next three, right? Crisis, mental health, and suicidal ideation, self-harm, even with abuse and neglect, right? We're talking about mandated reporting. We're talking about confidentiality. These are the things that you need to create a plan for. So if you take nothing else away from this training, is that I welcome you to go back to your org and see how many policies, protocols, and practices you all already have on the books and have had active practice with, where it comes to those, say, top 5 issues, right? How are you meeting clients at this intersection when they're in crisis? Now, our brains are developed to be able to respond to crisis, but we have to understand about the brain, right? When it's in crisis, we're looking at fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? Another one there. And we have to consider that no two people are going to react in exactly the same way, right? So we can anticipate that some clients are going to fall between having a crisis that is like around, say, the outcome of their legal matter or something that's happening on the case. There might be a mental health issue that arises, either with client or maybe with a family member. There's suicidal ideation and self-harm. What's the difference? Do you have an org? Do you have resources already set up? Okay. And so the best thing to remember about all of these, right? The real difficult ones, the crisis, the mental health, I would say the suicidal ideation, self-harm. You can't be in the middle of a crisis when you're trying to help somebody in a crisis, right? So your tone of voice, your space, give people space, right? Check in with them. Don't bargain, right? Always ask them, how can I help? I want to help. Is it okay if I call so-and-so? Decide what your policies and procedures are around that. How are you going to maintain confidentiality? Do you have releases of information? Are they specific? Are they general? I've worked with attorneys long enough to know that you guys don't do boilerplate releases of info generally. So with that said, what is it going to look like? Right? And what is that conversation with the client? But I would definitely say you need to start getting comfortable with those difficult conversations. And if you have no other, tool at your disposal, role playing, set some time aside, pick the hardest cases you guys have had at your legal org and get comfortable with those conversations, right? The more you skirt around it, actually, the more difficult it is. So either the open-ended questions, the direct questions, right? Around suicidal ideation. Do you have a plan? Do you have means? Have you attempted before? Right? Like there are some really challenging questions there, but there are lots of tools available. And so I'm hoping that we'll have future trainings on these particular topics. But if I say nothing else, do not skirt around them. Think through as an org how you are capable of responding. What are your internal and external resources to assist a client? Because that will then allow you to walk your client through what's available, right? And again, tone, space, you need to regulate to help them regulate. Okay. All right. Abuse and neglect. That's a difficult area. So, if you're working with individuals with disabilities that are reliant on others for care, where does that come up, right? And we also need to talk about, right, conservatorships. We need to talk about if somebody is able to understand and contract, what does that look like? Who is responsible? How do you explain to somebody, this is my client, right? Especially when they have family members and caretakers. Make sure that's super clear, right? Not only in your work protocols, but that you feel like you understand it. And if you don't, take the time to check in with somebody around these issues, right? Somebody that's mentoring you, your direct supervisor. I encourage annual trainings on particular, on issues that arise regularly. With our org, it's safety planning, right? We work with survivors. So every client-facing member of our staff, of our team, should be well-equipped and know where those resources are, right? So know who your community is and know what those challenges are. But you need to practice with one another. Okay, having those conversations. If you have a team lead and you're able to be in on some of those conversations to offer additional support to a client to get you familiar, shadowing has been good as well. So think about different measures that you have at your disposal now. All right, case timelines, right? Grief and loss. There is going to be grief and loss. With a lot of the work that we do, there is grief and loss. So we just have to say it. We have to understand how it's the same and how it's different than other issues that arise, and have resources. Again, silence. I keep on bringing up silence. Case timelines. Sometimes we just have case timelines, and you're going to do the best you can, right? This isn't a magic answer. No one of these tools, but it's going to make it easier. And it's going to set you up better than had you not asked the questions around these issues, right? And then we know we have to understand how trauma works. And we know that it impacts credibility of our clients at times, right? So if we understand how it works, how can we help our client with coping? How do we ask for those, I don't know, say they need some ADA accommodations? Give ample time when you're having to go to court. Have supports in place as you're sitting down and meeting with your client, right? And then how do you frame unfavorable legal outcomes? I'm just saying legal. As I mentioned, we've had court cases that did not go the way we wanted, but the client felt empowered afterwards. So where can we adjust our sails a little bit on this? Okay, I see that there might be oh, somebody is asking. Okay, wonderful. Suggested fonts. I would say we'll have, I guess that question I'll kick over to Abby. There are some resources when you are doing presentations, and some of those are actually on the LAC website. If you're going to offer a training, they actually have a really great supportive document. I don't know if you can upload that doc for the group, Kasha. I know others were interested in knowing how to maybe provide alternative text and some other guides. All right, great. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do you stay in the game? Next slide. All right, so I mentioned this before, self-awareness. You need to be self-aware. You need to know when you are doing well, when you feel strong, when you feel capable, and you need to know when maybe your battery is running low, right? And I would say the stress, burnout, and vicarious trauma, I have added some resources at the end of this. This will probably be its own training, and there are some other wonderful ones on this website that can be provided as well. But please look out for future trainings in this area. Support. Determine who your support team is going to be, right? At home and at work, right? Growth and practice. The easiest way to get burnt out is to stop growing professionally. So how do you challenge yourself? What projects do you want? Have you actually breathed life into them? Have you spoken with your supervisor? Have you looked for funding to kind of fuel some of these projects? It's really important. It keeps you vital within your career, okay? Shifts in professional role. Do you need to take a step forward, a step back? Do you need to maybe change hierarchical systems at your org? Are there some opportunities for collaboration? Contribution and impact. Again, who determines that? It should be you, right? So what is your value to your org? What do you bring to the team, right? What keeps you, in line and vital and necessary at the org? But also, what is meaningful for you? What do you do for love, right? What do you love about that? Compassion, satisfaction. What do you get out of that? And then decisions around retirement. Don't wait. Like if you're just starting, be thinking about it now, because your story might change as you go through. If you're at the end, or if you're like, gosh, I'm not done paying off my student loans and I'm still in it, right? Or I haven't made enough. I'm not going to retire yet. Well, then make that time meaningful. Make some decisions, right? If you're like me, there might not be somebody around to care for you. Get that knowledge, bring it into your org, bring in some financial planners, bring in, decide what you're going to need, right? I'm going to need a lot of long-term care. Maybe I want to plan for long-term care for myself, right? What does that look like? Does that mean that I have to tighten my belt now in certain areas? Like, what do I forecast? But the one thing I know is don't wait to start living till then. You need to be living today. So what brings you love? What brings love into your life? What do you genuinely feel inspired and awe of? Awe and wonder. Look up any book online right now on awe and wonder, right? Keep yourself vital. All right, next slide. And I did leave the ProQual as a resource. Moving on to personal growth and self-care. So last slide. You want to establish a baseline. So that ProQual that I left a link to will help you establish a baseline. You can also read more about compassion satisfaction. It's the thing that balances all those other things like secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, burnout. You need the good along with what's challenging. You want to check in with yourself periodically. You want to have a wellness plan and you want to adjust. The same one that works for you at 20. I used to run marathons. It's not going to work for me at 52. My back just said no, right? So now I walk a lot. I hike a lot. All right. Exercise, eat well, and rest. Some of you may have heard that rest is resistance. It is. It's really important, especially if you're a practitioner, if you're out there doing legal work in communities that are underserved, that are underrepresented. And if you yourself, say are, a person of color, and at different times as things are evolving at our orgs, right? It's a little bumpy, right? And sometimes people ask you to be the expert, but you're the one in it. So it's hard to find that balance, right? So it's really important that we rest. Don't forgo sleep. Name your feelings and feel. Do not compartmentalize. I notice that a lot of the questions you guys have, and I think it's one, it's a training in and of itself, but how do you keep open, right? Without shutting down out of fear of that, for that experience of vicarious trauma. And you want to maintain relationships that support your plan, whether internally, in your family life, with your partners and your family members and your pets. Pets are a big one, a good thing that came out of the pandemic, right? Really great thing. People were connecting with these beautiful creatures. And most importantly, ask for help. It is worse to not ask than to ask. So ask for help. Last slide. Okay, so in summary, working with clients who experience trauma, systemic barriers, and challenges to their access of basic human needs present legal aid providers the opportunity to meet their clients in the most vulnerable of spaces. That's when you're meeting them. That's when they walk through your door. Their well-being is intricately related to our own as we engage in work that calls out our ability to be empathic, client-centered, and simultaneously committed to our own long-term health through sustainable practices. Hopefully, some of those suggestions and the tools I've also added for you to go a little deeper, and hopefully we'll have you in on future trainings on those specific topics around specific difficult conversations. But I highlighted the ones that I'm recommending that you go back to your org and look at. Do an organizational trauma-informed assessment. Look to see if you have protocols around those difficult conversation bullet points, right? And start work groups where you're practicing having mock conversations. You need to hear it. because this is like role play. I get it, but it's the first step, right? And here you go. So many of you know Brené Brown. There is The Power of Vulnerability. It's a little cartoon thing, but it's important to keep open, right? And not shut down in this work. The ProQual is a great resource. It's right there. The Practical Guide to Implementing a Trauma-Informed Approach is down there. We have motivational interviewing, 2 resources on that. And we have at least 2 articles about maintaining work and self-care. And there's this workbook on vicarious traumatization. They have great exercises. Maybe utilize that. And I'd be interested in hearing back from you at some point. Feel free to reach out to Kasha or myself. And then this wonderful book, it's one of the newer ones that was out by Brené Brown. I'm a big fan of hers. Mapping Meaningful Connection in the Language of Human Experience. So again, those connections, those difficult conversations, right? And I believe we answered most of the questions in the Q&A. And I will wait to hear. If you did not get your question answered, please reach out to Kasha and she will forward your question to me and I will do my best to get back to you timely. Thank you again for your attention. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This webinar was hosted by the Legal Aid Association of California, also known as LAC. We are the membership organization for California's civil legal aid nonprofits. Our job is to advocate in the legislature, in the courts, and with the State Bar of California on behalf of the community of nonprofits that serve low-income Californians. In addition to our online and in-person trainings, LAC provides coordination and advocacy for increased funding to support organizations like yours. Thank you.